So here we have Unit 7, assignment number 7. This is part 2. And so we're just going to finish up these last 3 questions. And they're all quartic equations. They're all x to the 4th. We've never done one of these before, but these are some special quartic equations that we can actually factor. Just like we could factor x squared plus 7x plus 6. If I were to factor that, I would have x times x is x squared. And then I want something that multiplies together to give me 6 that adds to 7. That's going to be plus 6 and plus 7. And so this is 1 here. 6x plus 1x, which does give me 7x. I can factor this in a very similar way. I'm going to have, instead of x times x, that gives me x squared, I'm going to have an x squared and an x squared that gives me x to the 4th. And then I want to multiply something here and here that gives me 6 that adds up to 7. And that's going to be a positive 6 and a positive 1 equals 0. So now I have 2 quadratic equations here. I have x squared plus 6 and I have x squared plus 1. And if those two things multiply together to give me 0, one of those must be 0. Let's assume it's the first one. If x squared plus 6 is 0, then I'm going to go ahead and subtract 6 from both sides. So x squared equals negative 6. If I take the square root of both sides, then x is going to equal plus or minus I radical 6. Those are 2 solutions. My other 2 solutions come from when x squared plus 1 equals 0. And I would subtract 1 from both sides, so x squared equals negative 1. And when I take the square root of both sides, I'm going to have x equals the square root of negative 1, which is plus or minus I. So I have 4 solutions to a 4th degree equation, and they're plus and minus I radical 6 and plus or minus I. They're all imaginary solutions. Let's apply the same thing to number 7. Let's see if we can factor this. To get x to the 4th, I'm going to have x squared times x squared. Then I'm going to somehow get negative 8, but I want it to add up to negative 2, so I'm going to try negative 4 and positive 2. Because negative 4 and positive 2 does give me negative 8, but when I multiply these together, this is negative 4x squared and positive 2x squared, which does give me negative 2x squared. So now I have 2 things that could, when I multiply them together, give me 0. One of them is x squared minus 4 equals 0, and the other one is x squared plus 2 equals 0. Now there's several ways that we can solve the first one. X squared minus 4 equals 0. We could factor this. I could add 4 and take the square root of both sides. If I were to factor this more, I could factor x squared minus 4 into x times x would give me x squared, and a positive 2 and a negative 2 multiply together to give me negative 4 with nothing in the middle, which means my solutions are going to be negative 2 and positive 2. I could have also solved that by square rooting. I just could have added 4, taken the square root of 4, which would be plus or minus 2. Now I don't have the luxury to factor the part on the right, but what I am going to do is subtract 2 from both sides, so I have x squared equals negative 2, and when I take the square root of that, I'll have x equals plus or minus the square root of negative 2, which is I radical 2. So I have 2 imaginary solutions and then 2 real solutions. Let's take a look at the last question here. I'm going to, again, try to factor this, and all the ones that you're going to have that are 4th degree equations, at least right now, will be ones that you could factor. So we have x squared here, we have x squared here. I want to multiply something together to give me 18 that adds to 11. So I think that's going to be 9 and 2. So 9 and 2 equals 0. And so when I take x squared plus 9, I can't factor this. It's not like x squared plus 3 and x squared minus 3 would work, because a positive 3 and a negative 3 would give me negative 9. This is positive 9. So this is kind of like number 6. I'm just going to take x squared plus 9 equals 0. Subtract 9 from both sides, so x squared equals negative 9. Take the square root of both sides, and x is going to equal plus or minus 3i. And then when I solve the one on the right, I would subtract 2 from both sides, so x squared is going to equal negative 2. Take the square root of both sides, and x equals plus or minus I radical 2. And those are my 4 solutions. That's the end of video number 2, part 2 on assignment number 7. And hopefully this made sense, and we'll go over it tomorrow in class.